My name is Michael, and up until recently, I thought my life was as solid as the foundation of the suburban house Jessica and I built together. I'm 36, a software engineer, the kind of guy who loves his routines, work, family, and the occasional weekend barbecue. My wife Jessica was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Ambitious, compassionate, and absolutely stunning. She worked as a PR specialist and was deeply involved in charity work, her calendar always packed with galas, fundraisers, and events to better the community. We had been married for 8 years, and for most of that time, I truly believed we were the perfect couple. Our life was the picture of suburban success. We lived in a 2-story house just outside Chicago, complete with a sparkling pool in the backyard, surrounded by a neatly trimmed lawn. It was the kind of place where the neighbors waved at you while jogging by or grilling burgers on a summer afternoon. I drove a Ford Explorer, reliable, spacious, and safe, perfect for family life, while Jessica adored her Lexus RX 350. She said it made her feel confident and in control, like the professional powerhouse she was. It was summer 2023, and our plans for the future seemed as solid as ever. We had been talking about taking a vacation to the Florida Keys, a symbolic getaway to celebrate our bond. Jessica had a knack for planning trips, creating itineraries filled with sunsets and cocktails on the beach. She made it all seem so seamless, and I felt reassured knowing she was by my side. But it wasn't just vacations that we were planning. We often talked about starting a family someday, though we both agreed there was no rush. Between my job and her hectic career, we enjoyed the freedom of living for ourselves, indulging in date nights and lazy Sundays by the pool. Friends and family often joked that we were that couple, the one everyone admired. Jessica had a natural magnetism, the kind of charm that lit up a room, and I loved being the man who got to call her my wife. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back, I can see the cracks now, the faint warnings that something wasn't quite right. But at the time, I ignored them, blind to the idea that my perfect life might not be so perfect after all. Jessica had always been ambitious, throwing herself into her work with an intensity that was admirable, if not exhausting. She thrived in her PR role, navigating high-profile clients and organizing events that made headlines. She had a way of commanding attention, whether in a boardroom or at a charity gala. It wasn't unusual for her to come home late or spend weekends preparing for a big pitch. But this summer, those late nights started to feel different. We were still close, or so I thought. Even after 8 years, we made time for each other, stealing moments in the kitchen while making dinner or sharing quiet evenings watching Netflix. Sure, we had our disagreements. Every couple does. But nothing that couldn't be fixed with a heartfelt apology or a hug. I never doubted her, never had reason to. Jessica was my rock, and I believed I was hers. On the surface, everything was normal. Yet, beneath the surface, I began to sense a shift. I just didn't know it yet. Our weekends were usually spent together, either lounging by the pool or exploring the city. We loved visiting River North, with its trendy restaurants and bustling nightlife, though we usually kept things low-key. Jessica would often drag me to her favorite coffee shop, where she sipped oat milk lattes while planning her next big project. I would sit across from her, stealing glances and marveling at how someone could look so effortlessly put together. I had always admired her drive, her ability to balance so much while still making time for us. But that summer, her schedule became even more hectic. She started taking more calls at odd hours, and her phone never seemed to stop buzzing. WhatsApp, Telegram, and Slack notifications lit up her screen like a neon sign. When I asked, she brushed it off. "Work's just crazy right now," she'd say with a tired smile. I didn't question it. After all, I trusted her. One evening, as we sat by the pool, I suggested we finalize our plans for the Florida Keys trip. Jessica hesitated. "I'm not sure I can get away just yet," she said, her eyes focused on the shimmering water. "There's a lot happening at work." Her response surprised me. She had been the one pushing for the trip in the first place, saying how much we needed the time together. But I told myself she was just stressed, that it wasn't a big deal. I let it go. Because why wouldn't I? We had built a life together, a partnership that I thought was unshakable. I never imagined that Jessica could be hiding something from me, that beneath the surface of her perfect smile lay secrets that would soon unravel everything I thought I knew. For now, though, I lived in blissful ignorance, clinging to the belief that our love was as solid as ever. But as I would soon discover, even the strongest foundations can crack when the truth is buried deep enough. It started with little things. Jessica had always been busy, her job demanding and her schedule chaotic. But there was a rhythm to her madness, a predictability that made her absences feel routine, not suspicious. This summer, however, something shifted. She began coming home later than usual, with excuses that didn't quite add up. A last-minute meeting, she'd say. Clients can be so demanding. I wanted to believe her. I really did. The first sign that something was off came during one of our routine date nights. Every month, without fail, we'd go to Olive Garden, a place we both loved for its simplicity. We'd share a bottle of wine, reminisce about old times, and make plans for the future. But when I suggested it this time, Jessica waved it off without looking up from her phone. I can't tonight. Work's been insane, she said. Her tone clipped. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it before quickly flipping it over on the table. Is everything okay? I asked, my voice laced with concern. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. Just a lot going on. That night, I noticed her wedding ring was missing. It was small but unmistakable, a piece of her identity that she never took off, not even when washing dishes or working out. Where's your ring? I asked casually. Oh, she said, glancing at her hand as if realizing it for the first time. I must have left it in the bathroom after my shower. Her explanation was reasonable, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she avoided my eyes, the nervous edge in her voice. I wanted to press further, but I stopped myself. We'd been together for 8 years. If she said it was nothing, I had no reason not to believe her. At least, that's what I told myself. Over the next few weeks, the small cracks in our relationship began to widen. Jessica's phone became an extension of her hand, constantly buzzing with messages and calls. When I asked who it was, she always had an answer. Her assistant, a client, her mother. But she started taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. And when I glanced over her shoulder one evening, I noticed she had changed her lock screen password. You changed your code? I asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, yeah, she said lightly. It's just a work thing. Some security update. Jessica had never been secretive about her phone before. I didn't even know the old password because I'd never needed it. But now, the phone felt like a barrier, a wall she had quietly built between us. One Friday night, I came home early, hoping to surprise her with takeout from her favorite Thai place. I parked my Ford Explorer in the driveway and noticed her Lexus was already in the garage. As I walked into the house, I heard the faint hum of her voice coming from the living room. She was on a call, speaking softly but urgently. I set the food on the counter and stepped closer, trying not to intrude. I miss you too, she said, her tone warm in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. I'll find a way. I promise. My stomach churned. Who was she talking to? Before I could process it, she hung up and turned around, startled to see me standing there. Michael, you scared me, she said, her voice a little too bright. What are you doing home so early? I thought I'd surprise you, I said, gesturing to the takeout bag. Pad Thai and spring rolls, your favorite. Her smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back. That's so sweet of you, she said, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. But I already ate. I had a late lunch with a client. She was lying. I could feel it in my gut, but I didn't push. Instead, I sat at the dining table, eating alone while Jessica busied herself with something on her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keys, her eyes fixed on the screen. I couldn't help but notice how she angled the laptop away from me, shielding whatever she was working on. The final straw came a week later. We were supposed to attend a charity gala together, one of Jessica's big events. She had been talking about it for months, excited to show me off to her colleagues. But that evening, as I was tying my tie in the mirror, she walked into the bedroom and announced she couldn't go. I'm so sorry, Michael, she said, sounding genuinely regretful. Something came up at work. I need to stay late and handle it. You're skipping your own event? I asked, confused. She nodded, biting her lip. It can't be helped. You should still go, though. Represent the family. I went, but I felt out of place the entire night. Jessica was the social butterfly, the one who thrived in these settings. Without her, I felt invisible. Worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't at work. When I got home, her Lexus wasn't in the garage. I didn't ask where she had been when she came home later that night, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. I didn't want to know, but deep down, I already did. That was the moment I knew. Something was happening, something I couldn't ignore any longer. Jessica was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own home. When trust begins to crumble, paranoia takes its place. That's where I found myself in the weeks after Jessica's odd behavior became impossible to ignore. The late nights, the missing wedding ring, the evasive answers, they all painted a picture I didn't want to see. But as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, my gut wouldn't let it go. Something was wrong, and I had to find out what. Jessica's Lexus RX 350 was her pride and joy. She had picked the pearl white color with such enthusiasm, calling it classic but bold. The car came with every luxury feature imaginable, including a built-in tracking system. One evening, after she had gone to bed, I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed Lexus tracking app into the search bar. I felt guilty, as though I were crossing a line. But then I reminded myself of the unanswered questions, the lies. If she had nothing to hide, there would be no harm in looking. Within minutes, I had downloaded the app and synced it to the car's system. The next time Jessica drove somewhere, I'd know exactly where she went. The first ping came the following day. She had told me she was working late, but her car was parked in River North, a trendy Chicago neighborhood known for its upscale restaurants and bars. I checked the time, 7:30 p.m. If she was meeting a client, why hadn't she mentioned it? Why would a work meeting be held at RPM Italian, one of the most romantic restaurants in the city? My doubts intensified when I decided to dig deeper. I stopped by a local electronics store on my way home from work and picked up a Sony mini recorder. It was small enough to slip into Jessica's Michael Kors handbag without her noticing. As I held it in my hand that evening, I debated whether to go through with it. Was I really going to spy on my wife? But then I thought about her whispering on the phone, the way she had said, "I miss you." The memory fueled my resolve. I slipped the recorder into her bag the next morning before she left for work, my heart pounding the entire time. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I checked the Lexus tracker religiously, watching as her car parked in the same River North area nearly every evening. Each time, the pattern was the same. She'd leave work at 6 p.m., arrive at a specific parking garage, and stay there for hours. I didn't know what she was doing, but I was determined to find out. On the fourth day, I retrieved the recorder from her bag while she was in the shower. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The audio file was grainy, but clear enough to understand. "God, I wish I could see you right now," Jessica's voice said, soft and full of longing. "Michael's been so distracted lately. He wouldn't even notice if I left." My chest tightened. The next voice belonged to a man, a deep, confident tone that sent a surge of anger through me. "You're incredible, Jess. I can't wait until we can be together without sneaking around." My mind raced. The pieces were coming together, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had called him Jess, a nickname she had never allowed me to use, insisting it sounded too casual. Who was this man, and how long had this been going on? Determined to confront her, I devised a plan to follow her myself. That Saturday, I told Jessica I had a work meeting and left the house before she did. I parked my Ford Explorer a few blocks from our home and waited. Sure enough, at 6 p.m., her Lexus pulled out of the driveway. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She drove straight to the River North parking garage. I parked nearby and watched as she stepped out of the car, dressed in a sleek black dress I had never seen before. She looked stunning, every detail carefully curated. Her makeup flawless, her heels high enough to turn heads. My stomach churned as I watched her walk into RPM Italian, where a man was waiting for her. He stood to greet her, pulling her into an embrace that lasted a second too long. I snapped a photo on my iPhone, my heart pounding. It was real. All the suspicions, the doubts, it was all real. She was cheating on me. I stayed in my car, watching from a distance as they shared dinner. They laughed, leaned in close, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside. I wanted to burst through the doors and demand answers, to call her out for betraying me. But I held back. I needed more proof, more ammunition to confront her. When they left the restaurant, I followed them to a nearby Hilton hotel. My hands shook as I watched them walk into the lobby, hand in hand. I snapped another photo before driving away, my vision blurred by tears. That night, Jessica came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my work meeting went, and climbed into bed without a care in the world. I sat in the living room, staring at the photos on my phone, wondering how the woman I loved could betray me so effortlessly. Something inside me shifted that night. I was no longer just a husband. I was a man preparing for war. Saturday night. I parked my Ford Explorer a block away from the Hilton Chicago, the same hotel where Jessica and her mystery man had disappeared earlier. My stomach churned with a mix of anger, anxiety, and heartbreak. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for all this. But deep down, I knew the truth. The photos on my phone didn't lie. The hours ticked by as I sat in the driver's seat, wrestling with the decision to confront her now or wait until I had gathered every shred of proof. I thought of the man I had seen her with, his polished suit, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Who was he? A colleague? A client? Or was this something even deeper? By 11 p.m., I couldn't take the waiting anymore. My fists clenched around the steering wheel as I considered storming into the hotel and demanding answers. But I knew better. I had to stay calm, gather my evidence, and approach this logically. I didn't sleep that night. Back home, I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the photos I had taken. Jessica, laughing with him at dinner. Jessica, walking into the Hilton, her hand intertwined with his. They felt like daggers, each one slicing through the life we had built together. I wanted to scream, to shatter the illusion of perfection she had so carefully crafted. But I stayed quiet. This wasn't the time to lose control. The next morning, Jessica acted as though nothing had happened. She woke up early, made herself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone. She even smiled at me, her usual confident grin that now felt like a mask. "How was your meeting yesterday?" she asked casually. "Productive," I replied, forcing my voice to remain even. I stared at her, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation. There was none. She was a master at pretending. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the image of her in that black dress, leaning into him at dinner. It replayed in my mind like a broken record. I needed answers, and I needed them now. That evening, Jessica left the house again, claiming she had to meet a client to discuss an upcoming PR campaign. "It's last minute, but important," she said, grabbing her bag. I watched her walk out the door, my jaw tight. Once her Lexus pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and keys. This time, I didn't just follow her. I documented every move she made. Her car led me back to the same parking garage in River North, where she parked on the second level. From a distance, I saw her step out, her outfit impeccably tailored, her hair falling perfectly over her shoulders. She walked briskly toward the same restaurant, RPM Italian. My chest tightened as I saw him waiting for her at the entrance. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. I took more photos, each one adding to the arsenal I was building against her. As they walked inside, I debated following them. But the thought of seeing them up close, sharing a meal, laughing, it was too much. Instead, I stayed outside, scrolling through the photos I had taken, each one a piece of the puzzle I was desperately trying to solve. After dinner, they didn't go straight to the Hilton. This time, they took a walk along the Chicago Riverwalk. The night was cool, the city lights reflecting off the water, creating a scene that would have been romantic under different circumstances. Jessica clung to his arm, her laugh carrying through the air. She looked happy, happier than she had with me in months. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I followed them from a distance, keeping to the shadows. When they finally reached the Hilton, I watched as they entered together, disappearing into the elevator. My hands shook as I snapped another photo of the two of them before driving away. At home, I couldn't face her when she returned. Jessica kissed me on the cheek, murmured something about the client meeting going well, and headed to bed. I stayed in the living room, my phone in hand, scrolling through the damning evidence. The photos, the recordings, the tracker logs, they all pointed to one thing. My wife was having an affair. I wanted to confront her then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But I held back. Confrontation was emotional, impulsive. I needed to be strategic. I needed her to admit it on her own terms. The following day, I began compiling everything I had. I created a folder on my laptop, labeling it simply Jessica. Inside were all the photos, the recordings from the Sony device, and the tracker logs from her Lexus. I even added screenshots of her recent activity on WhatsApp and Telegram, where messages had been marked as read but were conspicuously absent from our conversations. With every file I added, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about reclaiming control of my life. Jessica had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. That night, as Jessica sat across from me at the dinner table, I studied her closely. She looked radiant, as always, her smile lighting up the room. But all I could see was betrayal. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I knew the moment was coming. The moment I would lay everything on the table and watch her world unravel. But for now, I stayed silent, biding my time. The storm was brewing, and when it hit, there would be no turning back. It was the evening I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Days of following Jessica, documenting her lies, and watching her with someone else had left me emotionally raw, but also prepared. I had compiled every shred of evidence, the photos, the recordings, the tracker logs. I rehearsed my words in my head a dozen times, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. The moment finally arrived when Jessica came home late that night. She parked her Lexus in the garage, her heels clicking against the floor as she entered the house. I was waiting for her in the living room, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. On the coffee table sat her phone, my laptop, and the folder labeled Jessica. My heart pounded as she walked in, wearing the same dress she had worn to meet him. "Hey," she said casually, pulling off her heels. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment, her hand still on the heel she was removing. "Can it wait? It's been a long day." "No, it can't," I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. "Sit." Jessica hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. Slowly, she sank into the armchair, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. "What's this about?" she asked, feigning innocence. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached for her phone and slid it across the table toward her. "Unlock it." Her expression flickered, a mix of confusion and unease. "Why?" "Just do it, Jessica." She hesitated, then picked up the phone and tapped in her passcode. I watched as she handed it back to me, her demeanor shifting to one of mild defiance. "Happy now?" Ignoring her tone, I opened her WhatsApp. The messages were gone, of course, but I didn't need them. I set the phone back down and opened my laptop, turning the screen toward her. The photos of her and her lover at RPM Italian, walking along the Riverwalk and entering the Hilton glowed on the screen. Jessica's face paled. "Michael, I can explain." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this." She reached for the laptop, as if to close it, but I pushed it out of her reach. "I have more," I said, my voice rising slightly. I clicked on the audio file and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, warm and intimate. "Michael's been so distracted lately. He wouldn't even notice if I left." Then came his voice, smooth and self-assured. "You're incredible, Jess. I can't wait until we can be together without sneaking around." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Who is he?" I asked, my tone colder than I had ever heard it. She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. It's not what it looks like. Don't lie to me, I snapped. Who is he? After a long silence, she finally spoke. His name is Daniel. He's a colleague. A colleague, I repeated bitterly. Is that what you call someone you meet at hotels and whisper sweet nothings to? Someone you hold hands with and laugh with while I sit at home like a fool? Jessica started to cry, her tears falling freely now. Michael, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I stood, unable to contain my anger any longer. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. Do you even care what you've done to me? To us? I do care, she sobbed. I still love you. No, you don't, I said, shaking my head. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied, cheated, and destroyed everything we built together. She reached out for me, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. I can't do this, Jessica. I can't look at you and not see what you've done. Please, Michael, she begged. We can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes. But I was already shaking my head. It's too late, I said, my voice breaking. You've made your choice and now I'm making mine. That night, I packed a bag and left. Jessica tried to stop me, pleading with me to stay, but her words fell on deaf ears. As I drove away, my Ford Explorer loaded with everything I could grab in a hurry, I felt a mix of relief and despair. The life I thought I had was over, shattered by the woman I had trusted more than anyone. But one thing was clear. I was done being lied to. Jessica's betrayal had changed everything, and there was no going back. The days that followed were a blur of pain, anger, and uncertainty. I stayed at a motel just outside the city, a cheap, unassuming place with paper-thin walls and a flickering neon sign out front. It wasn't home, but it was far enough from Jessica and the memories of our life together. Each morning, I woke up to the cold realization that the woman I loved had betrayed me. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I could have been so blind. I replayed every conversation, every excuse she'd given, searching for the signs I had missed. They were all there, hidden in plain sight. Jessica called me constantly. At first, I ignored her, letting her voicemails pile up like discarded letters. But curiosity got the better of me, and one night, I listened to them. Michael, please pick up, her voice pleaded, cracking with emotion. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I love you. I love us. Please, come home. Another voicemail came hours later. You can hate me all you want, but don't give up on us. We've been through too much together. Her words should have moved me, but they didn't. All I could think about was the look in her eyes when she was with him. The joy, the freedom. She hadn't just cheated on me. She'd emotionally detached long before I caught her. The first tangible step in rebuilding my life came when I met with a divorce attorney. His office was located downtown, in one of those glass high-rises on Michigan Avenue. The view from his window overlooked the Chicago River, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile conference room where we sat. Infidelity makes things clear-cut in Illinois, the attorney, Mr. Bradley, explained, adjusting his glasses. With the evidence you've provided, you have a strong case for a favorable settlement. He sifted through the folder of photos, audio recordings, and tracker logs I had compiled. Each piece of evidence felt like a wound, reopened and scrutinized. But I knew it was necessary. If I wanted to protect myself, I had to be ruthless. Jessica might fight this, he warned, especially if there's significant marital property involved. But given the circumstances, I believe we can push for you to keep the house. I nodded, barely able to process his words. The house. The one we had made a home together, where we dreamed of raising a family. Now, it was just another piece of leverage in a legal battle. Jessica's lover, Daniel, turned out to be her boss, the owner of the PR firm she worked for. The revelation stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the power dynamic, the realization that she had risked everything for someone who could never love her the way I had. A mutual friend reached out to me one evening, offering sympathy and a tidbit of gossip. Did you hear? Daniel's wife found out about the affair. It's all over the office. Good, I said coldly, though the news did little to ease my pain. Jessica's life was unraveling just as much as mine. She called me again, leaving a voicemail filled with desperation. "Michael, I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, and now everything is falling apart. Please, let's talk. I need you." But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word she said felt hollow, like a plea for damage control rather than genuine remorse. The turning point came when I received an offer from a company in Dallas. It was a position I had turned down months ago, reluctant to uproot our life in Chicago. But now, the idea of starting fresh in a new city felt like salvation. I called the hiring manager, and within a week, the job was mine. Packing up my life wasn't easy. The house was filled with echoes of the life Jessica and I had built together. The photos on the walls, the souvenirs from vacations, the little notes we used to leave each other. I boxed up my belongings methodically, careful not to linger too long on any one item. The hardest part was deciding what to do with the wedding album. It sat on the shelf in our living room, untouched for years. I flipped through the pages one last time, staring at the smiles that now felt like lies. Then, with a heavy heart, I closed the book and left it behind. On my last night in Chicago, I stood in the empty living room of our house, the walls bare and the furniture gone. The silence was deafening. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, not just Jessica, but the life I had imagined for us. The future I thought was certain. As I drove away in my Ford Explorer, my belongings packed neatly in the back, I didn't look back. The house, the memories, and the betrayal were all behind me now. Ahead lay Dallas, a new job, and the promise of a fresh start. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The pain was still there, but it was quieter, dulled by the knowledge that I was moving forward. Jessica had shattered my world, but she hadn't destroyed me. In the rearview mirror, the city lights of Chicago faded into the distance, and with them, the man I used to be. The drive to Dallas was long, giving me ample time to reflect on everything that had happened. The pain of Jessica's betrayal still lingered, like a wound that hadn't quite healed. But there was also a quiet determination building within me, a resolve to move forward, to reclaim the life she had tried to destroy. When I arrived in Dallas, I checked into a modest apartment that the company had arranged for me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The space felt liberating in its simplicity, free from the memories and expectations that had suffocated me back in Chicago. I stood by the window that first night, looking out at the city lights, feeling a mix of trepidation and hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment. My new job kept me busy, and for the first time in months, my mind wasn't consumed by Jessica. The team welcomed me warmly, and my boss, Laura, seemed genuinely invested in my success. I threw myself into the work, grateful for the distraction. But the evenings were harder. Alone in my apartment, the quiet brought back memories of the life I had left behind. I often thought about Jessica, not with longing, but with a sense of disbelief. How could someone I had loved so deeply betray me so completely? I hadn't spoken to her since the day I left. My attorney handled all communication, keeping me updated on the divorce proceedings. Jessica had tried to fight for the house, but the evidence of her infidelity left her with little ground to stand on. In the end, I got to keep the house, though I had no intention of returning to it. I didn't want the ghosts of our past to haunt me. One day, while unpacking a box, I came across the guitar I hadn't touched in years. It had been a gift from Jessica on our first anniversary, back when our love felt unbreakable. I almost set it aside, but something made me pick it up. Sitting by the window, I strummed a few chords, the sound filling the empty apartment. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had lost. Jessica reached out one final time before the divorce was finalized. She left a voicemail, her voice trembling with emotion. "Michael, I don't know if you'll ever listen to this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry for everything. I was selfish, and I let you down in ways I can never take back. Losing you is the worst thing I've ever experienced, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I hope you find happiness, even if it's not with me. You deserve that." I listened to her words, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. Her apology came too late, and while it might have been genuine, it didn't change anything. I deleted the message and blocked her number. The door to that chapter of my life was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. Months passed, and the pain gradually dulled, replaced by a cautious optimism. I started going out more, exploring Dallas, meeting new people. It was terrifying at first, but each small step felt like a victory. I even joined a local band, playing guitar on weekends at small venues. Music became my therapy, a way to channel the emotions I couldn't always put into words. One evening, after a gig at a cozy bar downtown, I found myself talking to a woman named Rachel. She was smart, kind, and refreshingly genuine. We laughed over shared stories, her green eyes sparkling in the dim light. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I thought I had lost: hope. On a cool spring night, nearly a year after leaving Chicago, I drove to a quiet spot overlooking the city. The stars were bright, the air filled with the hum of cicadas. I stepped out of the car and stood there for a while, letting the moment wash over me. In my hand, I held my wedding ring, the last physical tie to my past. It had sat in the glove compartment of my Ford Explorer for months, a constant reminder of what had been. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling its weight one last time before hurling it into the night. It disappeared into the darkness, and with it, the remnants of a life I no longer belonged to. As I climbed back into the car, a sense of peace settled over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking back. The road ahead was wide open, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Driving back to my apartment, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the same as the one who had left Chicago. He was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the unknown. Jessica had broken my heart, but she hadn't broken me. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. One step at a time, one day at a time. Ahead lay a new chapter, and for the first time, I felt truly free.